Good day, Docker fans, and Kubernetes fans, and NodeJS fans, and cloud native fans, and just everything working in a wonderful, perfect DevOps world. That's really what we're here for. So my name is Brett. If you're new to this channel, every week I do a live Ask Me Anything, sort of a Q&A on pretty much everything DevOps, server admin, containers. That's kind of what my job is, and now I spend a lot of my time helping others, so welcome. And this hour abouts that we're going to spend is me talking about some late stuff that's happening, latest news stuff, and then we jump into questions. And you ask the questions, I come up with answers. Hopefully those answers are good answers and will help you. Sometimes I don't have an answer and we just have to, go home. Otherwise, I'm glad you're here. Get your questions in early, get them in order there. I will ask from the top down. I think we pretty much always get to every question every time. If I run out of time in the video, because we don't want to make this too long, I try to answer every question in chat. So if you're getting here late and you're asking questions in chat and I maybe end this video a little early, then your question still gets answered. Just hang out in chat for a few minutes and I'll be answering questions afterwards. So this week, I'm back in the recording studio finishing up Docker for Node.js. So you'll see the logo up here. This is what I'm focusing on right now. So if you're interested at all in Node.js, this isn't a Node.js 101 course. This isn't teaching you Node.js. And frankly, it's not teaching you the basics of Docker. That's what my Docker Mastery course is for. You can see all that stuff in the description. There's links down there for the newsletter where you get coupons and announcements, and then links to my resources, many of them free. In fact, let me just show you where those are at. And on my website, brettfisher.com/Docker, you will see a list of my course coupons as well as a bunch of stuff. It's videos that I've done free online. It's podcasts I've been on. It's all of my feeds on the socials. It's conference talks. It's open source repos for tools that might help you solve problems. It's what I call best, what we call it, good defaults repos on GitHub for, at this point, Node.js and PHP, for trying to help you get some basics for a new, fresh project if you want to do it with Docker and get all of the bells and whistles that Docker gives you. So that stuff's there. Let's go back and talk about what some of the things that are going on in this course, right? So if you're doing Docker and you love containers and you're planning on doing something with Node.js, whether that's just a pet project at home or maybe you're at work and you're going to deploy it on Kubernetes or Swarm or just regular old Docker servers, this course is for you. So the goal of this course and what I'm teaching and focusing on in this course is taking you beyond the basics of Docker and how to get the perfect and best setup for solving all of your traditional problems with Node.js, but in a container. So we learn how to set up Docker Compose perfectly on the right setup locally, tested by hundreds of other people on GitHub, and trying to get your whole project set up so that you can jump into containers when you need them, that you can build in containers, that it's fast, that you don't have any sort of NPM dependency problems where the host might be on a different platform than your container, if you've ever run into that issue. Then we go and start talking about how to set up your images and your builds for production. How do you make sure that your images are small and secure and are minimal? How do you do build automation for your pipelines? Then we're not going to obviously teach you the whole CI/CD solution, but what are some of the things you need to watch out for with Node? How do you set up Node in production so that you make sure you are persistent on your connections, meaning your users during an update cycle don't get a big 400 or 500 error because you're cycling through all the containers too fast and you've interrupted their connections. That's a big issue in production. So this course is going to sort of span from focusing on local development with Node in Docker, and then through the process of setting up compose files and stack files and all the CI/CD stuff that you need to care about with building an image, and proper tagging if you're an image person with continuous integration, you know that you need to have proper tagging. We'll talk about several ways to do that. So this course, when's it coming out? Well, I had hoped to have it by Black Friday, which is tomorrow. Maybe next week. So next week, we probably won't have the course launched, but if you're on the newsletter, don't worry. Save up the money that you need for the course. It's going to be the same price as my old courses on Udemy, and I will shoot you a link in the newsletter to get that course as soon as it's launched. In other news, let's talk about some stuff. So we've got someone in the chat, by the way, earlier asked about PHP. I have a PHP repo, and we can talk more about that later in the questions, so ask your questions about that. It's a work in progress, so it's not exactly finished. All the documentation needs to be a little updated, and it doesn't just work out of the box. You kind of got to fiddle with it, because PHP with Composer and Laravel and all the other stuff is kind of complicated. So anyway, check that out if you're a PHP person. But we learned 8 days ago that Docker released 1809, which is the first major release for this new release cycle, which means that every 6 months they're releasing a new Docker version for the community. And now, most importantly, those versions are going to be synced up between the Docker Enterprise paid solutions, especially Windows Server people, and the community editions, the free stuff for the rest of us. So those versions are now all going to be synced. Docker's released that 1809 on all the platforms. And in fact, if you're on Docker for Mac or Docker for Windows, you should have seen an update this week. I think I got my Docker for Mac update yesterday or the day before. So hopefully if you're on Windows, you're getting that too. There's going to be lots of fixes in this release, several big new features that I'm excited about, and more. So you can actually check out the release notes if you really want to know the details over on the Docker GitHub repo. And it's not Moby/Moby. That's where a lot of the source code goes for Docker. But the releases for the Docker Community Edition are on github.com/docker/dockerce/releases. And I will put that in the chat so that you can check that out later. The changelog there is it's great. They always do a great job of showing major PRs and anything that was fixed along the way, changes. And you can scroll down here and basically read. This is what I do every release. I just take 5 minutes. I read through each line. And if it sounds like something I care about, then I'll just click the link and sort of save it for later reading. A lot of these may not affect you. And so if it doesn't sound interesting to you, it's probably not something that will affect you in your day-to-day Docker life. So there's some cool stuff there. The biggest new features in my mind, are the release of a new builder. So for building images, something called Build Kit. We've talked about that for several weeks now if you've been around. And there's a great Build Kit information all about it. So I would just Build Kit Docker 1809. So I'm just going to Google this. And there's some information actually on the Docker blog. There's information from 7 days ago. So anyway, I'm not prepared to give you a Build Kit demo today, but the cool thing is it's really easy to enable, and you just enable that with an environment variable. So if you've ever set an environment variable on your machine in the command line, you're just going to enable Build Kit through an environment variable, and once you've done that, you don't need to have experimental on anymore. It's a full-fledged feature in all releases. That will probably speed up your build significantly. In fact, if we just, I can probably figure something out for you. If I just jump into a repo, let's go into my course, and let's jump into Docker file. So we've got this, let's see, Docker file here. So I'm going to do a quick Docker build and test one. Let's see, I want to do a separate file, and then I'm going to build this directory. So this would be a normal build, right? We've all probably done this. If you're new to Docker, if you're brand new to Docker, after this video, check out my course, dockermastery.com. But if this is a normal build, right? So you would have this happening, and we can just kill this because we don't really need to do all that. But if I do an export and do a Docker build kit 1 and do that same thing again, you'll notice the output looks different. And we get this really interesting real-time seconds counting sort of interface. And this is a part of the new builder, essentially a brand new, totally fresh library for building images. It now does a lot of this stuff asynchronously and not necessarily in a top-down approach. So we get a whole bunch of speed improvements because it's able to be smart and build different parts at different times and do simultaneous layers of the image even, which we never had that feature before. That was kind of crazy. So it can do sort of parallel tasking in your builds. There's a lot more coming with this toolkit. It's going to allow a lot of new features. I think we're now able to finally mount SSH secrets and other secrets in and do bind mounts in building. I haven't actually tested that out yet, but there's lots of new stuff coming. Stay tuned to this channel and my newsletter and other stuff for new stuff happening with that. So the other big feature is SSH, and I talked about that a few weeks ago. And there's a great, if you just actually this Tonus came out with this just 8 days ago. I haven't actually read this one. So these are the two big features that I'm talking about, and this is one of the core engineers on Docker, so he's really excited about this, obviously. And this is the build kit feature I just talked about, but he also describes the feature for you to basically use SSH so that you never have to leave your local command line. You can now jump into any remote Docker server on Mac and Windows, doesn't matter, as long as they're running the SSH daemon and you have SSH access. You don't need to SSH into the server. You just enable another feature by just doing an export and then do Docker host. And you're going to set this environment variable to SSH and then however you're going to get to it. So in my case, I might do root at London. This is a server of mine. And now when I do that, and then I do a Docker version, it's going to go over the internet using SSH, and you'll see this is actually the version of my Linux server on the internet. If I unset Docker host and then do that again, let's see if we get a different version. It might be the same exact version because we're on the same build. Oh, well, you can see the build date is different. So the build there is the 7th at 0, and this is a build 7th at 1600. So you can tell, or not 1600, 16 minutes. So you can tell that the builds are different. So at least it proves a little bit that you were really on a different host. And that's all you have to do. Like that's all you have to do to jump in and do a remote server. And that way I never have to copy my Docker files or my Compose files or anything to the server. I just have everything local and I can operate against that remote system. Before, if you've ever done this, you'd have to set up TLS certificates. You have to open the TCP port on the Docker service, the daemon that runs on that machine. It's a bunch of work. It's a pain in the butt. So check that stuff out. It's all in 1809. I'll keep talking about that stuff because I'm very excited. The last piece of news before we get to Q&A, if you hadn't heard on the Docker website, Forrester, which is one of the analyst companies out there, released a report about container platforms. So what is a container platform? Let me let you think about that. It's not an engine. It's more than an engine. A platform is a bunch of features all together that a business would need to run everything. It's going to usually have a GUI in it to manage both the containers, the launching of the containers, as well as an orchestrator. It's going to manage an orchestrator. It's probably going to have some sort of management for a registry built in. There's a lot of stuff there, and usually the bigger your enterprise gets, and especially when you get multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, you need an advanced solution that's more than just some open source tools. If you do it completely open source, you probably need a team of people to manage that, especially if you're talking 50, 100 servers. You're going to need a team. So that's where the platforms are coming out. And so this report was pretty cool because it kind of gives you that nice graphic. It's not like the Gartner graphic, the Magic Quadrant graphic. They do it a little bit different here in Forrester. So if you can see this, what we basically have, if I can maximize this a little bit, let me zoom out. So what you see here, this is the new wave. I'm not really sure. This is their way of showing it. So what we have here is basically the top right is the best in their eyes, and you have as it gets to the right over here, it is going to be things that have products that have a better strategy or more cohesive, inclusive strategy, and then the ones that are close to the top have actually executed on that and are bringing the results to the product and to the customers. So what's interesting is we see Red Hat now, IBM. This is interesting, by the way, if you didn't know, IBM bought Red Hat. So IBM down here in the middle of the graph is going to suddenly shoot up and will be right up here, right next to Docker. So you have Docker Enterprise and you have Red Hat OpenShift. Those are the two big products. And then you have Rancher Labs with Rancher, which is a free product that you, similar to OpenShift, they're free to use the open source versions, but if you want the full thing, you really just need to pay for support because that's ideally what you're doing with those products. Docker Enterprise, you don't get the software unless you pay for it. So those are the three sort of big systems that are the leaders. You see Pivotal out there with Cloud Foundry, Mesosphere with DCOS, and so on and so forth. So anyway, those, if you're really into building a large container platform that's going to be complex and it's not just going to be some small single, swarm or single Kubernetes cluster that's just, 10 or 20 hosts and they're all the same and everything's very uniform, you're probably going to need one of these big platforms. If you don't have a team of 2 or 3 dedicated DevOps people, you're probably going to need one of these platforms unless you're hosting everything in the cloud and you're using a cloud vendor's tool, right? So if you're using Fargate, EKS, stuff like that to help ease the management of all this stuff. So anyway, you might want to check that stuff out. The report you can download on Docker's website. If you just go to blog.docker.com and search through the last couple of weeks, you'll see the report and you can download it for free and read about the strengths and weaknesses of all those platforms out there. So here's the point in this live stream where I answer your questions. So thanks so much for waiting around and we talk about some news and stuff. So I'm going to scroll to the top and we're going to go from the top down. And apologies up front if I mispronounce names a little bit, and feel free to correct me and give me the correct pronunciation of your name if I mess it up. So I want to say hi to everyone. I will go down the list and say hi. Good morning, Gavin. Gavin's one of the sort of students that's always hanging around in chat. So if you're not aware, in my courses, we also come with a Slack chat that you can get as a part of the courses. And there's dozens of people hanging out there every day. I think at this point we have over almost 13,000 people signed up in Slack. And people are always talking about learning Docker, what they're working on. And it's a fun group. I'm really proud of that and community that we're building there and excited to help see that grow and help people just solve problems. And so Gavin's in there helping people all the time. And he's the first one on the shout out. Alexandre, hello. Welcome back. Payam, hello, good morning. Mario, hello. And then Bala's out of the gate with the first question. So, good morning. I bought your second course, Docker Mastery, Swarm Mastery. Oh, the second course, Docker Swarm Mastery. It looks similar to the first course. Are there any new topics getting to the specific or Swarm or DCA? So yes, Bala. So that course, I actually need to update the main promo video on that second course. So the second course has a shared part of the first course. About the first half of it is shared with the first course, Docker Mastery, because Docker Mastery was meant to focus on the Docker core engine toolkit, the command line, Docker Compose, stuff like that. And it gives you a taste of the feature set in Swarm. It gives you the basic functionality, but it doesn't teach you the workflows of Swarm, right? There's a couple of videos in there where I give you some tastes of that, but if you really want more, if you're planning on using Swarm in production or on a cluster for real work, then you should take Swarm Mastery, and you can skip the first, 3 or 4 or 5 sections. You can kind of figure out which videos are new because I recorded those later. And that course actually has 2 more sections coming at least. I'm a little bit behind on those because I wanted to get this Docker for Node.js course out. But don't worry, those sections are not done, and I will be finishing those and getting those to you. So right now, it does a lot of stuff where it focuses on doing updates and how you do proper rolling updates, which is a really hard thing to get right in stable environments where you need to guarantee that your clients are always up, right? If you don't want to make a maintenance window and take everything down, you need to make sure your apps do proper updating. So I spend over an hour, I think it's close to 2 hours, just on that topic alone in that course that I did not cover in Docker Mastery. The next few things that are coming in that are monitoring, logging, as well as front-end proxies. You can get a taste of a lot of that stuff by checking out my demos from DockerCon, and that's at dogversus.cat. So I have a domain addiction. I like to buy domain names that are fun. So dog-versus-cat will send you to my repo that is basically how to build out a swarm. And I try to get it to be as production-y as possible. So you can check that out. I'll put the link in chat. That is a lot of the stuff that's coming to the Swarm course. I'm just going to make it more detailed and more professional looking in the Swarm course. But you can check out this repo. It actually comes with a 40-minute video from DockerCon. And there's more coming to that as well, because I'm going to be doing that at DockerCon in Barcelona again in 3 weeks. So there's going to be more updates coming to that repo. If you're interested in Swarm, check that out. Great question. I do not plan on having a DCA course yet. So if you're interested in the Docker Certified Associate, I think is what it is right now, the DCA is really about Docker Enterprise, and I don't yet teach Docker Enterprise in my courses. The DCA is meant for someone that's going to use Docker Enterprise, which is something that's like parallel to OpenShift or a branded Kubernetes like Fargate or something like that, right? So it makes sense that the DCA would be about that enterprise version. What I am considering, and let me know in the chat if you're interested in this, what I am considering doing is a 2 to 3 to maybe 4 hour video set specifically on DCA as a study guide. And what it will be is me going through every single one of the requirements in the official Docker study guide and doing a format like this where I'm working through the examples and I'm talking about them and giving you some basic knowledge on each one of those steps. And it's meant not to give you an intro to Docker, but that would be sort of a study guide that you would use right before you take the course. Tell me what you think about that in the chat. I would love to get some feedback because, you know, DCA, there's not a huge amount of people. There's probably thousands that have taken it, but it's not a huge audience. And so I don't want to spend a bunch of time essentially making a video course that only sells for a few bucks on the internet, and then, you know, only 100 people pay for it. So if you're really interested in that, let me know in chat. Let me know on Twitter or wherever you hang out. And I will consider that. I was thinking of maybe doing that in early 2019 and releasing that course as sort of a paid additional course on top of the other ones. And you would need to take Docker Mastery and Swarm Mastery first, because those would definitely be requirements for taking the Docker test. So let me know in the chat about that, and I'll put that, you know, up on the list if I think a lot of people are going to want to check that out. And if you take the DCA test before I get to that course, good luck. It's a pretty good test. I thought it was a very fair test. All right. Hello, Thomas. Good morning, Dan. Do you have an ETA on the forthcoming Docker Swarm Mastery course sections? So, Dan, here's the plan on Swarm. Apologies for being late on that. I basically got busy over the entire summer period here in North America, traveling and doing workshops. But the only other upcoming conference I'm speaking at is DockerCon, where I'll be giving 2 workshops and then also speaking. And so I'll be very busy the first week of December. And then I'm coming back, and I'm not even taking a family holiday for Christmas or the New Year. I'm going to be working all through the holidays and into the new year, finishing up this Docker for Node.js course, and then working on another section for the Swarm Mastery course. And then we're going to be working on the Docker for Kubernetes course. So the Swarm course is not done. I will finish those commitments. I don't give deadlines just because that ends up stressing me out, and I always set deadlines too early, and I can never, you know, finish them. That's why the courses are late. So I'm basically taking time off from the conferences after DockerCon and going to take a nice, good break and focus exclusively with you all on the courses and improving the ones that are there, maybe updating Docker Mastery, having some stuff there, fixing some of the bugs with Docker Mastery, as well as adding some more sections to Docker Swarm. So I would say expect something from me in early 2019, if not sooner. I don't want to give certain guarantees, but right now I'm focused on finishing the Docker for Node.js course, and I'll hopefully get that out here. Hopefully this month. We'll see. It's going to be tough to get it done around Thanksgiving in America, but we'll see what we can do. Thanks for asking, and again, apologies for not having that to you. You're always welcome to ask any questions in Slack, as in here. I will happily give demos here in this live chat, or really, if someone on Docker Mastery Slack chat has an idea for maybe doing a 5-minute video, I'm happy to do. Sometimes I do a live video, sort of an ad hoc for people inside of the Slack chat that have taken my courses, and then we'll just put that on YouTube and record it and have it up there. It's not a polished sort of scenario, but if you have specific questions, hey, that's why we have this. I'm ready to go. I got my shell right here. Let's do it. Biker's back. Good morning, Biker 2010. One of my course fans, it's often in chat. I've turned on Docker EE level 7, but can't seem to get it to work. It also seems to interfere with existing stack-generated networks. Is level 7 all or nothing? Do all of my stacks have to use it? Before level 7, I just accessed stacks/sites using IP port. Okay, great question, Biker. You're probably going to find information about level 7, and I'll tell you talk to others about what that is in a minute, over at the Success Portal. So I'm assuming that if you're a paid customer of Docker, that you know about the Success site. This is equivalent to maybe like the Docker TechNet. I'm sorry, the Microsoft TechNet. This is more of the business side, knowledge base article stuff. There is a gold mine of information here. So I recommend that if anyone is interested in using Docker in production, even just regular Docker and regular free Swarm, a lot of the stuff here that's really designed for their paid product is this. The paid product's just a bunch of extra features on top of the existing free source, open source stuff. So you go check that out. I'm assuming you've checked that out already. So what is L7? So in Docker Enterprise, it comes with a front-end reverse proxy out of the box. This would be similar to your Traffic or maybe an Nginx reverse proxy. They're using Interlock, I believe is the name of the tool. You can actually Google that and find it on GitHub. Yeah, by one of the Docker team members. This is actually a free tool, but they fancy it up and put it into Docker Enterprise as a part of the GUI. And what this does is anything you want to have a web layer 7, and that's OSI layer 7, if you're not familiar with the OSI layers. OSI layer 7 is high up in the protocol stack where we have things like HTTP. And that is usually necessary when you want to run multiple websites on the same port, like port 80 or 443, and you want to run them all on the same host, on the same cluster, whether that's Kubernetes or Swarm. So if you want to do that and you want to have it on that same port without some sort of external load balancer that maybe solves the problem for you, you're going to need a reverse proxy. Now, I'm a fan in the open source world of Traffic, which is a great one that you can check out. This is not for enterprise customers because you get a layer 7 proxy out of the box. But if you're not an enterprise customer, you can check out Traffic. So for the Docker Enterprise Layer 7, once you enable it, it's not enabled out of the box. You enable the checkbox. You need to use labels correctly in your stacks and your services in order to enable that functionality. I go through that a little bit in my dog versus cat repo. So I give an example up here of how to use that, I think. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so stack EE. So I have this stack file that's for Enterprise Edition. And you can see here, I have these labels. Let me zoom in on that. Those labels are required for Docker Enterprise to use the layer 7 proxy. And basically what it's doing is it's saying, for this host name, go to this port on the container. And what will happen is that the layer 7 proxy, depending on how you set it up in the GUI, will listen on specific ports. So by default, you'll have it listen on port 80. It may default to port 8080, but you'll want it, if you don't have any proxy in front of your swarm, you'll want to have that proxy on port 80 and 443 so that it listens on the correct ports. And then you're telling it here what port the service is going to be listening on the back end. And then that proxy will basically redirect the traffic. In my experience, it just works. Once I have these proper labels, it just works. Check that out. Hopefully that'll get you past any hurdles you might have. Mario, you're welcome. Let's see. Niraj, hello. Gary, we are using Prometheus and Grafana for monitoring metrics in some of our apps and containers. Are there any other monitoring apps worth considering, particularly with ability for creating dashboards? I would say, okay, so Prometheus and Grafana, if, again, this is actually something that I talk about a little bit in my dog versus cat repo. I give an example here. There's actually some stack files here, and there's a great project for Swarm-enabled Prometheus and Grafana called SwarmProm by Stefan. And he has this basically, it's sort of a plug-and-play approach to the whole setup of Prometheus. So Prometheus is one of the most popular open source container monitoring solutions, and it's pretty slick. It was created by SoundCloud, but it's now an official open source project. I think it's graduated now by the CNCF, which is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation that takes care of a lot of open source projects and is sort of an industry consortium of companies that come together, and they have KubeCon and Cloud Native Con every year, or well, several times a year. I think actually right now they're in China having KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. Anyway, yes, absolutely. I would say I don't see people jumping on other open source tools as a monitoring database for free container monitoring. Okay, so there's a lot of, obviously there's other great tools, right? We have Sysdig, we have Datadog, Librato, there's lots of stuff like this. Datadog.com is a good one. Sysdig is another popular one. Anyway, I think it's I'm misspelling. I always misspell this one. Is it that one? No. Oh, that's Sentry. It's not the same thing. So there's other stuff out there. They're all paid products, though. So I'm not seeing a lot of people. I mean, there's the traditional monitoring solutions that have been in open source for a while, and those are all slowly catching up with container stuff. But I don't see a lot of new, fresh projects on new infrastructure using pure open source doing anything other than Prometheus. And you can kind of, if you've not someone who's checked out CNCF, go check out their website. They have some really good tools here. And the CNCF, their name is Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So they're focused on cloud native. But really, what you'll notice is that one of the assumptions of cloud native is containers, that everything is containerized. They tend to focus on microservice, although it's not exclusive to that. So you can use lots of these tools with legacy, large applications, legacy non-traditional, non-cloud native applications. So it doesn't really, the name itself is a little misleading. It's for everyone. And what you'll find is, let's see here. If you check out landscape.cncf.io, they used to have a poster, they still do, but it's gotten so complicated that the poster is too much. It's overwhelming. So once you go to here, you can say, hey, I would like to look at a category of tools. Let me look. Let's see, let me scroll down. And just show me monitoring. And you'll see that they have one graduated project and then other projects that are part of monitoring that maybe aren't official. Well, these are member projects. And then these are, basically a lot of these are paid products. So you can actually look at, say, the license open source. And then you get a filter there as well. So some of these are misleading because they may be open source, but you still have to pay to get everything you need out of them. And anyway, so this is a way to kind of look at stuff. Now, I'll warn you, the CNCF has gotten so popular and so big that everyone's in it. Like everyone's saying that they're cloud native and they support cloud. So it's a little tough at this point because it's the Me Too scenario where everybody's like, Me too, me too. I've got a product that works in here. Add me to the list. And I would say that traditional products like Nagios, sure, they've been around a while and they obviously are big monitoring products. But if you're looking for sort of the latest gen of how we're thinking about monitoring, Prometheus is the way to go. Hopefully that'll get you started. Well, you're already using Prometheus, so it sounds like you already know what you're doing. But I wouldn't switch from there unless you're having particular limitations. The biggest thing I see with Prometheus is that just like all the other infrastructure, if you don't have the people to manage it and the time to manage it, you probably need to consider a paid solution. And I would immediately look at Sysdig and Datadog, just because those are the two that I've used, so I can vouch for those. Obviously, if you're in a cloud vendor, you might want to try theirs first, but usually those don't do everything you want them to do, so you still need a third-party paid product. Pam, in Swarm, how do we get into shell of service containers with service names? All right, so what you're asking about is in a Swarm or in any cluster, Kubernetes, how do you access a shell of a container itself? So in Swarm, you would do that by doing Docker exec the same way that you would in a Docker server. And you would need to be on the node, or at least talking to the node's engine of the container that's running on. So that's a little tricky. If you've got dozens of nodes, first you need to run a couple of Swarm commands to figure out what node that container is running on, and then you need to go find that node. I would say that if you are in a Swarm scenario where you're using this in the real world and you're using it on a bunch of servers, what I would look at is Portainer. So if you're not going to do Docker Enterprise, which does this as well, Portainer is one way to give you a shell inside of any container from a point-and-click interface in the website. So if I went in here and just did their live demo, this is a free product. So it has a similar GUI to Docker Enterprise, but it doesn't have a lot of the enterprise features that Docker Enterprise has. But it continues to have a surprising amount of new features all the time. Let's go check it out. Let's see, what was it? Admin, try Portainer. So in this interface, I have one Swarm called local. And if I go in here, I'll see one container. And when I'm looking at this actual container, I don't know what node it's running on. I don't have to care. There's a little button here that allows me to get a shell inside it. Now, in the background, what this is probably just doing is they're using the Docker API to do a Docker exec into the container. And I can just say the command, yeah. And now I'm in a shell of that container. So I can look at what's in there. There you go. So that might be a better way in a production setting where you need an ops console. I tend to focus on the command line. So I would probably do a Docker service ls, and then figure out what service I need to get into, and then do a Docker service ps to figure out where all the containers are running. And then I would hop over to that node and then jump into the container through a Docker exec. That's how I would do it. But there you go. Hope that helps. All right, Biker, next question. Any idea when Docker EE mesh routing will support Windows nodes? It does not work now and is in the Microsoft documentation as coming soon. Okay, so Biker, let's see. So Docker EE does support overlay networking right now in 1803 Windows machines. I've tested it. It works. You need to make, there's actually a support article in the success site. Nope. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it in my history. It's got to be Windows Server 1803. It's never going to work on Server 2016 because they're not updating that anymore. 1803 firewall overlay, I think. Let's see if I can find it. So if you have to basically, on 1803 Windows Server, you have to open up the firewall. Basically, the firewall is blocking Swarm ingress and overlay networks from working properly. But all the functionality is there. Now, that being said, if you don't even want to have to do this, you want Windows Server 1809 or Windows Server 2019 and Docker Enterprise Edition 1809 that was just released. If you use that combo, it also works out of the box. I've been assured by Docker that there is no additional worries, that it all works out of the box there, and that's going to be the first version that they're officially saying, like, basically everything's working great out of the box. I think we're still waiting on Docker or on Microsoft to release Windows Server 2019. I think I checked a couple days ago. It wasn't available on the MSDN and partner download websites for me anyway. So I would say probably if you're thinking of doing this in production, you can either today try to just enable this on 1809. I tested everything on 1809 and everything works except for the DNS problem until I enable this, and then it does work. Everything worked for me at least. And then officially with all of the things is 1809. And remember on 1809, they're finally, and of course, I should back up. On 1803, you have to be using Docker EE 1803, which means you have to update your Docker engine on the server with PowerShell. You can't be using the old Docker 1706 version. So hopefully that helps. Jacob, I couldn't get Docker build -SSH to work. Do you think you could demo that? I actually just did, Jacob, at the very beginning of this video. Oh, I'm sorry. Your Docker build SSH. Sorry. I have not done it. So I can't remember, Jacob, were you the one in chat that was having the issue there today? I have not tried it. So I would say jump on the moby/issues and see if other people are having problems with it and submit a bug report if you think it's not working. That is with the official release of 1809. I wouldn't, if you're using beta versions, make sure you get updated to the official release, because I haven't tried it yet, so we'll have to check that out later. Biker is back. Forrester report did require an account. Has it been released to public? Yes. I had to fill out a Docker form, but I did not have to have a Forrester account. So Forrester Docker report. Yeah, so this URL I will put in chat for you. That didn't, at least when I signed up for it, didn't require a Forrester account. It just required me to sign up, basically to get emails from Docker. And then I just, you unsubscribe from those if you don't want them. So Biker says, I love your Udemy course, both. Thank you so much. Can you recommend others? Black Friday sale, $9.99 for almost everything. Let's see. So I have some friends that do stuff there. If you're into web programming, Colt Steele is a good, nice guy that I met at the Udemy conference this summer, and he focuses on web development, and especially he just released a brand new course on Bootcamp 4, or Bootstrap 4, sorry, which is the Twitter library for making nice looking websites out of the box. I'm still using Bootstrap 3. I'm kind of old school, but he just released a new course for Bootstrap 4, so you can check that out if you're a web programmer. I have taken one of his courses, so I can vouch for his quality, and I know he really cares about the quality of his courses and is always trying to make them better and better with each new release. If you're into ethical hacking, excuse me. If you're into ethical hacking, Zaid is also someone I met at Udemy. He has hacking courses, basically learning systems at a low level and how to get in them and how to break them. Ethical being the key word there. This is meant for white hat people, but obviously all knowledge can be used for good or evil. So the courses he does, he also cares a lot about. I know he really spends a lot of time in Q&A and helping his students. So his courses I would vouch for. I haven't taken any of his courses yet, but I know him as a nice person and that he really works a lot to help people. So I will say that I recommend those. So those are 2 recommendations. Maybe you can check those out if you're into that stuff. Aaron, hello. Biker's back. For example, they have Node.js classes, which may dovetail what you're doing now. Actually, that's a good point, Biker. I'm not teaching Node.js, the programming language. There are probably lots of other Node.js courses on there that are specific to doing Node, and some of those courses might even have basics of Docker in them. But I have not seen another course that focuses exclusively on intermediate knowledge of people that already know a little bit basics of Docker and basics of Node, and they want to use the best of containers for Node projects. I haven't seen a course dedicated to that, and since I'm spending many hours in this course, I'm hoping that it's going to be the one and only best way to learn after you've learned to use Node.js, because really, a course focusing on Node.js, we have Node.js now for a lot of platforms, so you don't even necessarily need Docker to develop in Node. And a lot of people that I know that even use containers sometimes still just develop locally on their host machine. They don't actually develop in containers. So this course that I'm building is designed to show you how you can build and run and develop in containers and get 99% of the functionality and feature set and speed that you would get by native development on Node and doing it in a container. Because sometimes it can be a little tricky, doing package JSONs in the container. How do you auto rebuild and auto restart Node servers with NodeMon, stuff like that. It will all be in my course. So Biker says absolutely on DCA. So that's 1 vote for a DCA course next year. Great. I will consider that. Aaron, what are the pros and cons of installing one node on a physical server versus multiple nodes? Aaron, if you have access to bare metal then I always do bare metal. With containers, bare metal is always going to be faster. It's always going to have more capacity. And frankly, it's one OS. So the only reason that I would consider, if I had access to a bare metal machine, splitting that up into multiple VMs is if I needed different OSs. Because, containers have to have a kernel on an OS, right? They only run on that one OS. So if I need some to run on a specific Linux kernel and other ones to run on a specific Windows kernel or something like that, then I'm going to have VMs on that same piece of bare metal if it's the only bare metal I got. That would be the only time I would do it. Otherwise, always bare metal. If you actually look at my resources at brettfisher.com/Docker and you scroll down a bit, almost about 2 years ago now, let's see, I have a white paper that I co-authored with Docker and HP Enterprise on performance benchmarks for MySQL, and we did just that. We compared MySQL in a bunch of VMs on the same host, MySQL in containers in a bunch of VMs on the same host, and then MySQL in containers on bare metal. So we used the same hardware and tested multiple databases running at the same time, multiple engines of MySQL running. And we did that in the 3 different models. So the non-container VM model, the containers in VMs model, and then containers bare metal model. And the bare metal one, hands down, in every performance test, because as you can imagine, you don't have a bunch of different OSs all running. The biggest win was, frankly, I got a bunch of hard drive and RAM back. Like, you just don't have a bunch of that overhead with all those different VMs running. You get a lot more of your RAM that you can use in your apps, and you get native bare metal performance. The reality is VMware and cloud hosters and all that, their virtualization technology is so close to bare metal now, far less than 10% hit, that you don't get a lot of CPU benefit out of the box, really. But what you do gain is disk savings, management time savings without having to deal with all those OSs, and a lot of RAM comes back by doing bare metal. Great question. I'm glad you asked it. Niraj says, I want to learn Docker Compose in detail. How can I learn? So Docker Compose is in my Docker course. I talk about it in Docker Mastery, so dockermastery.com. The coupon for that is available all the way at the top. If you need more than that, I am putting more Docker Compose features into my Node.js course coming out. It's specific to Node.js, but quite frankly, if you were doing PHP or Go, a lot of the same stuff works. You're just going to be using a different tool to solve these problems, because at the end of the day, it's just a different package manager. There are going to be some lectures, obviously, that are focused on connections in Node.js and how to manage connections during rolling updates and how to properly shut down Node.js containers, stuff like that. But if you really, really wanted more Docker Compose stuff than what Docker Mastery provides, then you would check that out. Otherwise, I might release some YouTube videos if you all are interested from that course that are a little bit more about Docker Compose. But quite frankly, I just read the Docker Compose documentation over and over and over again. There's so much on the Docker Compose website with the docs, right? So I read that stuff. I try new things because I myself haven't taken other Docker Compose courses. So there is a lot of features in the Compose file. I try new things, and I read all the stuff about Docker Compose here. There's dozens of pages on Compose in the Docker's website. So I'm not telling you to go, RTFM or anything, but I just sadly don't have any other courses that I know of or make that are exclusively on Compose outside of Docker Mastery. So good question. Mario asks, in a Docker file, I'm running run composer create project preferred dist Laravel Lumen. The thing is, when the container is created, I cannot see anything inside. Do you know why? So you probably shouldn't be creating a project. I don't know Composer that well. So I know Composer install, but Composer create project. When in the container is created, I cannot see anything inside. So my first question is, have you Docker exec into that container, like Docker Compose exec right in that container? Look around at the file set. What I always do is, if my Docker file is not working properly, right, I will Docker exec into the base image and build it manually, right? So if I'm at the command line and I'm in here and I have this Docker file, let me just cat out this Docker file. So this is a pretty simple Node Docker file. But if I'm having a problem with this Docker file, see how it says from Node 6 there? The very first thing I'll do is, if I'm having problems with this Docker file, is I will Docker run, and I will run like Node 6 Alpine, and I'll get a shell in it. And then I will do the run commands, right? So in this case, APK, add, update, teeny. So I will see if that command works in real time. Then I'll do a list of the directories and make sure that the directories are where I think they're going to be, and I will explore and act like this is a machine that I'm working on, right? So I will hand run these commands until I get them to work. Another pro tip there, though, is if I did a Docker build. Let's see. Yep. Answer tag test1. If I build this image, let's use the old builder. Let's do this. So if I do this, you see how, you may not have realized this, but when you do a Docker build locally on your machine, and this is only the case when you're building, you see this number right here where it says, do you use cache? So I can start, let's go back up here. I can start a Docker run from that layer. That's why when I do, let's see what we call it, test one. That's why when I do a Docker history test one, let me zoom out a little bit. You see how there's image names there, and then there's ones that are missing? So the missing is normal. When you download container images rather, you don't get each layer as its own image. You just get the image itself downloaded. But what you do get if you build things locally is you get the ability to jump into each layer as its own image, which means if I had a problem where something failed right here, and this is after my teeny, but before I copy in the source code, or let's say that right here, this is on this line, this is when I do the npm install. Let me actually do this one. This is when I've copied in the code. So I can do a Docker run, and not a lot of people know this. Docker run IT, and I actually, frankly, didn't learn this until I experimented and played with it and figured out that I could do this. And then I could get a shell in there. So I'm now in a container from an image layer because I built it in my local cache. So when you're building, technically in the background, Docker, when you do a Docker build, is creating containers, making changes, and then saving that container back to committing it to an image. And so one of the benefits you get is you get each one of these layers as an independent image that you can jump into as a container. So now I'm in there, and you'll see I only have the package file because I haven't jumped to the next line where it copies in files. So then if I actually jumped out and I exit, and then I do a Docker run again into the next layer, and then I do an ls. Oh, no. I did the same one, sorry. And I do the next layer. I should then see that it's copied in the files, right? Shell in there. And now I have the node modules because, what have I done? And so in the app, db8, let me make sure I have my lines missed. And so this one, sorry, the one before the last line is the one where I actually copy in all my source files. So then Docker run IT, so the last one had the node modules because it did an npm install, and then this layer should finally have all of my actual source files. So pro tip, you guys got a free one today. You can debug those two ways. Those are the two ways I do it. If I have a build fail, I will try to go into that line. If the build completes, but it's not like I want, I will start that image from a container, and away we go. So great question, and I'm glad I got to do a little demo there. All right, let's jump back to my big, ugly mug. All right, let's go on. Niraj, what is microservices in container? I'm not sure what that question is. I'm not sure what you mean by that question. Microservices are like any other thing in a container. But microservices are obviously small applications that you're designing in a distributed environment. They don't necessarily have to anything directly to do with containers. It's just that nowadays, when you're starting new projects, more and more people are choosing the microservices model, which is to say that you're splitting up your app into smaller functional pieces and then making containers out of each one of them. Once you start doing microservices where maybe you would traditionally have one big binary or one big app, and you maybe choose to split that out into multiple smaller apps for easier code management and teamwork. It works really well in a team environment compared to a big monolithic app. You're going to need containers. So a lot of people that do containers and are building new products choose to go microservices, or I guess the other way around. People that are wanting to do microservices will go containers because it becomes much harder to do microservices if you don't have containers to manage all those different applications and images. So great question, though. I'm not sure if I answered it. If I didn't, ask it more in the chat. All right, so we're going to give a few more minutes to questions, and then if I don't get to all your questions, we will answer those, and I'll answer those in chat afterwards. Tito, I'm trying to set up Postgres container image for integration testing. Can you talk about the best ways to pre-populate data, check in volumes, backup restore, others? Okay, so Tito, a lot of this is already in Docker Hub for you. So if you go over to Docker Hub, this is a common question. So let's go over to Postgres, right? I don't have them all memorized by heart. But what you'll find, either what I would always do is learn everything about your database image. If you are going to run databases in containers, you need to be an expert in every layer and everything that's going on in there. So one of the things you're going to see is the environment variables for setup, right? Now, how does this happen? Postgres doesn't do this stuff on its own. You'll even see, you can set up the database, you can set up these directories, and what you'll notice, you can even use secrets, stuff like this. What you'll notice is I'm not going to be able to read through all that on this call. But if you scroll back up and you go to the Docker file, you'll notice that it has an entry point script. So an entry point script today does a lot of things. It runs before the container launches the CMD command. Essentially, that's in the background, it's actually running them both at the same time. But for all intents and purposes, what's really going on here is a lot of these databases, MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, they're all running a script, and then before they start up, and then starting the command, right, which is the daemon for whatever the database is. And what you'll notice is it copies down at the bottom an entry point, right? Now, where is that entry point? Well, that script is, if you just are in the Docker file repo and you just go up one directory, you will see the entry point script for that application right there, and you can look at it. And it's essential that you know what the script is doing. As a DBA, because if you're running a container, you're now a DBA for that container. You need to know what's going on in this script. And one of the things it does is it takes all your environment variables and creates your usernames, your passwords, and stuff like that. One of the things it also tends to do is run any files you throw in a specific init directory. And I can't be certain about this with Postgres because I don't, again, memorize every one of these. But I know it does this with MySQL and with Mongo. So chances are it's probably doing this with Postgres. Is that there's a directory, if you read through here and then you read through the Docker file, there's a directory that if you throw files in there, usually it's in the Etsy directory, then it will automatically run those scripts. And I know like with Mongo, for example, it'll even run any JavaScript that you throw in there because Mongo is a JavaScript database. So it will run that JSON JavaScript stuff and import that data automatically for you if that's what you want. So you don't necessarily need to have that stuff in your own custom image. You might mount that at runtime, either through a bind mount or through something like a swarm configs are meant for that, or configs in Kubernetes. You're mounting it into the container at runtime, so you don't have to have a custom image. So that's how most people do that. As far as backups, if you're in my courses, I answer that in the Q&A for Docker Mastery. Backups, you just run another container, and then you run the dump commands from the container over the network to that database. Or you can exec into that container running of the database and run the commands locally inside that container. I tend to prefer running a separate container and then connecting to MySQL or Mongo or Postgres over the network, running my typical dump or backup commands like you normally would on a regular non-container system. And that way I can mount a volume inside that new container I'm running for backups. And then I can schedule that container on a scheduling basis with cron or some sort of job system. And so that's how you would do it. It's really the same thing you would do normally. You're just going to do whatever you did before inside a container and then back up stuff either to a bind mount or to a volume. So hopefully that helps you get started there. That's a great question. I could probably make an entire course on that topic. Colonel Panic says, will you attend the AWS reInvent? I don't. I actually don't attend any cloud-specific conferences yet, mostly because my conference schedule is already so booked all year long that I just don't have time. In fact, I didn't even have time this year to go to KubeCon, Cloud Native Conference, in December because have already been more than one conference a month lately. So I had to pick and choose, and I don't go to AWS's normally. So sorry, Mario. But the people that go to AWS love it. The reInvent is huge. It's one of the biggest conferences. So Mario, hey Brett, you said in the beginning of the video that the Laravel PHP and Docker is kind of complicated. Can you go into details? What I mean by that, and you can just check out my repo. Just search PHP defaults with my name probably, and you'll find this repo. PHP itself is complicated. It's an older language like Java, .NET, and so it's not as friendly as the newest languages like Node and Golang and stuff like that. So you've got to have usually, just for PHP, you've got to have PHP FPM, Nginx. You usually need Node in there because you usually do some NPM stuff like install Bower. You need Composer there. You usually have some apt-get requirements. Like if you look at a typical Docker file for a true PHP project, it's probably 3 times the size of a NodeJS one, or maybe even 10 times the size. Most of my projects that I see with real production PHP workloads they split it up into multiple files and then build intermediate images because PHP has so many dependencies. So that's really what I'm meaning. It's not so much that developing in PHP is complicated. It's getting your environment right in PHP that's complicated. And Laravel tries to solve some of that, but they're mostly focused on the application development, making that easier, and not so much the one command line. Like, there's, with Node.js, you just do an npm install, and that usually gets you 99% of what you need in a project. With PHP, and you usually have to do apt-gets and then do some Bower stuff and then composer stuff, and then make sure you have the Nginx and the proper version of PHP FPM and that they work together properly, and stuff like that, right? So that's really what I mean. Is it's more of a DevOps thing than it is a developer thing for PHP. Now, if you use Laravel doc, which I hear is pretty good, that solves some of those problems for development. All right. One more question. Let's see who's up. Biker, okay, I did a setup on 1709, 1803, so I'll check the firewall issue. 2019 is next week. Okay, cool. I don't have Azure 1809 image. Yes, using 1809 on 1803. Yeah, so Biker, 1809 on 1803 should, with that firewall change that you have to do manually, you should be able to do. Let's see. Victor, is there any chance that Docker Swarm will support SQL database like MySQL Postgres cluster in future Docker version? It supports it today. I have plenty of customers and students using database clusters in Swarm and Kubernetes. So I'm not sure what you mean it doesn't support it. You need your own stack file that sets it up. So if you're curious about how all that works, go look for Autopilot. Just search whatever your database technology is and then Autopilot. And you can actually go to the autopilotpattern.io website, and it will show you basically the autopilot pattern is all about helping automate the setup and deployment of applications that are traditionally hard or cluster-based and doing them inside of containers. So it's not the job of your orchestrator to know what databases do, right? That's an application. These are different layers of abstraction. It's the orchestrator job to get containers where they need to be and run them and then replace them if they're not healthy. It's the job of your application and your application design, like MySQL and whatever, to automate the setup. And that's why we're even seeing new database technologies like CockroachDB, those kind of things get created because in the world of containers, we want database setup to be really, really easy, and we want it to just work out of the box. And so that's not really the job of an orchestrator, at least not at this point. Let's see. Aaron, am I going to have a Kubernetes mastery course? Yes. Expect that in 2019. Erdem says, how will you make any Kubernetes course? Yes, I just answered that question. So I think you both asked that question exactly at the same time. So yes, Kubernetes is coming next year. Bala says yes for DCA, so that's 2 votes for a DCA prep course. Aaron, I am running a multi-platform swarm, meaning some nodes are x64 and some nodes are ARM8. How do I get my containers running across node independent of processor architecture if possible? Aaron, your orchestrator is going to do that for you. So Swarm, if you have a Swarm, you can have a Swarm with ARM, Windows, Node.js, Linux, and even mainframe all in the same Swarm. And when you deploy your container, you specify the image, and the image will have a manifest, and you can choose the platform. So this is all about putting it in your compose file or your stack create file, or commands, rather, your service create commands or your stack files. You're going to look at the manifest. And so you'll probably look in compose files for platform, and you can choose the platform. And then the orchestrator's job is to find a host that will suit the architecture of your image. So yes, you can do that. Is there a benefit to running multiple Swarm nodes on a single host, says Aaron? No, and you really shouldn't. Swarm is Docker. The Docker daemon runs Swarm, so they're the same thing. And so think of Swarm node per OS. It just depends on what kind of, if you're talking about multiple VMs on the same hardware, it just depends on what kind of failure you're looking for. Obviously, a single node is not going to give you hardware fault tolerance, But if you're looking for OS fault tolerance and you want to run 2 VMs on the same bare metal and then run Swarm on each one of those because you're worried about Linux failing, which I've really not seen. Usually if there's problems, it's with the app, it's with Docker, or you're usually filling up hard drive space. Quite frankly, a lot of people do that first, fill up the hard drive. So those are the problems. I don't normally see Linux kernel panics, but if you wanted OS level redundancy, sure, you could run 2 VMs on the same host. I don't see a lot of people doing that intentionally. They usually go across multiple hosts, but you could do that. I'm just going to say Prass. Sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your name too much. Is there any work around to make Docker containers privileged in Swarm mode, as this functionality has not been implemented yet? I need to do the access system GPIO for my Swarm containers. Prass, you can do this today. It's a secret. It's a secret. Okay, let me show you. If you look at the dog versus cat repo, this is not a built-in Swarm feature yet, but if you go and check out the GitHub issues that people are talking about it, you might see me at the bottom of that talking about that you can just run Docker inside Docker. And so what you do, and I have an example here, not specifically for your scenario, but let me just show you. I am running a Docker Swarm service that then runs a Docker command inside that container against the host that it's going to run on and against the Docker socket of that host, which means that I'm now running a Swarm service that will then execute a Docker run on the host that it's on. And it works. It actually doesn't work half bad. It works like you would expect. When that container in Docker run stops, then the service will stop that container and realize that it needs to be relaunched somewhere else. If you have a failure, if you scale up and scale down, it all works like you'd expect. It's kind of neat, actually. So you can do this as an example where I'm running a Docker plugin command against the host because there is no Swarm equivalent of the Docker plugin command. Another file I have in here for stack prune does a cleanup. It does a Docker prune command against the host from inside a service task on each host. And then it runs that in a simple little bash one-liner. I run it once a day. And so it does a cleanup of all the old images that aren't being used on each host once a day. That right there, when I saw someone else do this and I thought, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to put this in my Swarm. I didn't actually think this one up. So it doesn't even need to be a special container. I just did a bash one-liner as the command, and I run the Docker command against the host node that it's running on. So you can do that too. You can do that for all the things that Swarm doesn't support. And let me know how that works, because obviously we'd love to have that feature in Swarm, but until then, we can do this. And I do these on every Swarm I set up. I run this thing, and it just works. All right. Let's see. Docker shouldn't stop you from doing clustering already. It's application level. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for helping out. Thanks, Mario. Biker, totally true on PHP comments. We use Drupal 7.8, and the compose file is about 100 lines just getting ready to download, run Drupal. Yeah. So, I mean, PHP is a longer Docker file, but once you get it set and working, it tends to be great. It tends to work. So, all right, that's going to be my questions for today. I ran a little long because you all had such great questions. Thank you so much. I just realized, though, I wasn't sharing screen on that last demo. So for Prass, I apologize. And nobody mentioned it in Slack, but go check out these links. Prass, I apologize again for not sharing screen on that. But if you go check out my Docker dog versus cat repo, those examples are in there. This is another example. And those examples right there run services in stacks that basically do Docker runs on the node that they launch on. And so it's kind of a nested thing, but you're not technically running Docker in Docker. It's not running the Docker engine in the container. It's just bind mounting to the socket of the node it's running on and then doing a Docker run on that host. So it'd be the same thing as if you jumped on a specific node in the Swarm and ran Docker run for whatever you needed to run for special hardware. So thanks again, everyone. Let me just remind you that all the courses and information are below. If you want to know about my new course launches, sign up for the newsletter in the description. And I will probably have some fancy little banner here in the future